Hello, and welcome to another episode of the TFTuesday Podcast. My name is Zill, and today I have a very special friend on with the podcast. So, Gabriel Moon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gabriel Moon, and I am a full-time TF writer, and I have been so since the pandemic, which, as probably a lot of us have had too much free time, and I was able to take what I was doing kind of like part-time on the side and make it a full-time career. So it's very exciting.
That's awesome. Have you found that it's been difficult to kind of write throughout the course of the pandemic?
I actually kind of found it a lot easier, just because I had so much free time and everybody was home anyway, so it kind of worked out well that a lot of time to focus, I guess. A lot of time to not a lot of other things going on. Maybe I worked a little bit too much, but that is what it is.
Yeah, that is what it is, unfortunately. So then I'm curious to hear a little bit more about, your background and what kind of got you into transformation and particularly kind of set you on the path to doing writing as kind of your full-time job.
So I know, and my backstory is probably going to sound very familiar.
Mhm.
Like, I'm 35, and there's a lot of the guests that you've had on have been in that age range. So
Yeah.
there's like children of the 90s. Um, so I think I'm going to start with cartoons. I remember a lot of transformation sequences in cartoons like X-Men, Spider-Man, Gargoyles is a huge one.
Oh yeah.
Even like, I remember one from The Tick, which is kind of like a parody cartoon. There was like a dinosaur TF in one of the early episodes. I didn't do Street Sharks. I was a little bit... I guess I didn't have the
Really?
channel. Yeah, I didn't even see it until later.
Wow.
I know, until Aladdin was a big one.
Oh yeah.
Yep. But I remember watching these and being like kind of afraid, but there was something like formative in that fear.
Mhm.
I'm afraid of this, but I still need to watch it. Like, there was still that desire to consume this material, even though it like kind of had that fear response. And it was the same with like some early on movies. Like, I'm pretty sure I saw The Fly fairly early on, just like in the background while like my parents were watching it. That one
Right.
scene from Star Trek First Contact where Picard is dreaming about his time in the Borg Collective, and like he goes to
Yes.
the mirror and like the implant burst out of his cheek.
Mhm.
Like, that was fairly early on, I remember, before I became a fan of Star Trek. I'm going to bring up Goosebumps and Animorphs because they were extremely formative for my
They're
TF interest.
seminal. Yeah.
They absolutely are. I was into Animorphs from like Scholastic Book Fair, like right from the beginning. I read The Invasion, the first book, 3 times in one weekend. I was hooked, absolutely hooked. I remember you had a guest talking about one of the Goosebump books. I think it was Calling All Creeps was the name of it. I don't
Yes,
think...
yes it was.
Yeah, I don't think you guys remembered the name of it, but I remember, and I watched the Goosebumps TV show as well, and you don't actually see a TF in the book, but you actually get a TF at the end of the episode.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's just like like a very brief face TF, but yeah, there's actually a TF in the end of the episode. But yeah, Animorphs was extremely formative. I reread the series kind of in my later teens. Just, it still kind of holds up, especially like the whole like it's still obviously like geared for a younger audience, but like the themes still really hold up, I find.
Mhm.
But I remember reading it like when I was a little bit older and just having like more feelings towards the TF and wanting to like consume the TF sequences. And I know Kay Applegate, it was her and her husband who wrote most of the books.
Yeah, Michael Grant.
Can I just say, as an aside, that she seems like a wonderful person IRL?
She is. It's funny. I've seen this kind of go around before where it's like, there's like the seminal authors of like our childhood and how some of them haven't turned out the way we thought they were. But Kay Applegate, she's a real one. She has a trans woman daughter and she's very loudly supportive of it. She was and always is anti-war, which I think is great. I mean, the books themselves are kind of have a very strong anti-war
Yeah.
message.
She's very pro-abortion
Yeah.
because she
Yep.
had to have one.
Yep.
She posted a very passionate article on Twitter, and that was like, I read it, and I'm just like, one of your childhood heroes is an amazing person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, it makes me so happy, and I think that this is a bit of a tangent, but it's fine. Like I find that when you read those books, the messaging just sticks out in a way in retrospect that maybe it didn't when they were being read at the time in the 90s. Like, we kind of focus on the things that are interesting to us, like there's all the characters, they go through all these changes. Yes, there's the whole like classic like little guy versus like the big overarching big bad evil guy, with Visser 3 and the Yerks and everything. But if you actually like reread them now and you think about kind of the overall themes in the book series, they're very much there. Like they are very thoughtful and well handled, and the books really hold up in a way that I think a lot of older pieces of media don't always. And yeah, I really love those books, and not even just from a TF perspective, because like you can tell there was a lot of good thought put into the whole like plotting and everything. But anyways,
They are being, and not to like talk about animals for the whole episode, but they are being brought back in graphic novel form.
yes. Oh my
I think the
gosh.
third one, unfortunately, it seems like every year, which considering there's 54 books, it's kind of, maybe that's not feasible. And I don't think they had a contract beyond the third graphic novel, but the third one is coming out this fall.
Yes, I've read the first two and they are excellent. And honestly, the art in them really captures the kind of midpoint weird look of like TF in a really interesting way. Because I can't really tell if the artist who's doing it is like into quote unquote TF, but like the way they handle it is very accurate to the source material. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to picking up book 3 in a few months.
but yeah, sorry, you were saying about your
Oh, no worries.
formative interests.
Um, I guess, yeah, and Goosebumps too. Like, but like the Choose Your Own Adventure. There was one I remember, Alone in Snakebite Canyon was the name of it, and like one of the main story points in that is you as the main character pick up a pair of snake eyes, and they each glow with the form of an animal, and you would rub them and turn into that animal. And it's basically the plot of that is like your misadventures turning into the wrong animal. And I remember that being a really formative one. And of course, the werewolves. Like, absolutely, there were some really good Arlstein werewolves. Arlstein seems like a pretty. I haven't heard as much about him, but he seems pretty chill, as far as I know.
Yeah, I am convinced he is a TF fan himself. And also, yeah, he just seems very private as a person, which is totally fine. I
No,
mean, that's chill.
absolutely.
In some senses, it's almost like, well, I don't know what he thinks about anything, and maybe that's a good thing. I have no
Yeah,
idea.
no,
So,
absolutely. It's just like ignorance. Ignorance really is bliss.
yes, yes.
So that was sort of my childhood. Like, I was basically hungry for any werewolf material I could find, pardon the pun. Anything I could get my hands on, I read. I'm trying to think if there's anything that particularly stood out. Oh, there was a Dean Koontz book. I can't think of the name of it, but basically it was centered around a town that had been part of an experiment to eliminate human emotion
Oh,
through some
okay.
sort of nanotechnology, and basically that nanotechnology allowed you to alter your body willfully. So some people, in order to regain their sense of self, would turn themselves into animals like wolves, and run around, and they would fuck essentially and sort of do their thing. But then they got kind
As
of
one
stuck in,
does.
as one does. They eventually, like, some people got stuck in the forms. There's like some merger and some kind of like goo type TFs, like people would dissolve and merge into this like one being that comes out at the end of the story. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but
Yeah, yeah.
there's an alien TF, like a xenomorph TF. There's a merger with a computer. Like, there's a lot of really cool concepts in that. That was one I read early on. I cannot think of the name of it.
Was it the Moonlight Base series?
No, it wasn't
No.
a series. It was a solo.
Oh, it was a solo book. Okay, then I
Yeah,
don't know.
but yeah. Other than it was Kuntz. I think my real foray to TF, I was in a kind of bad place in my life, and I figured, what the hell? I'll Google werewolves. I checked out werewolves on Wikipedia. I checked out. That led me to Transformation. That led me to the Transformation Story Archive. This was in 2005. Yeah, I was 18. I'm actually like probably the only person who like found their porn actually as an adult. religious upbringing. But
No, that's totally fair and understandable.
yeah,
I feel like there's actually a sizable number of people I think who went through that and just it's not really talked about. I think a lot of people like there is a bit of a bias in terms of the folks who in some ways mastered the internet, mastered it early on, and so you hear more about those stories versus the people who came into it later. But I think there's lots of people who probably also didn't discover the porn element until they were adults, and that is totally understandable.
yeah, like there was definitely some like interest when I was younger, but like I never acted on it until like I was 18, and then I started reading all of these various stories on the TSA, and there were a few that were really formative. And I'll get into those a little bit because they're more relevant to one of the topics that I know we're going to get into. But yeah, that was kind of like my foray. I remember finding the what's the name of the website? Transfer. I remember finding that early
Transfer.
on. I found artists like Arinia, Foxy. They were early, very early, sort of pioneers for that. It was quite a few years since I actually got into Furfinity. Like a lot of your guests, I was a Transformation fan before I was furry. It wasn't until I moved to Ontario and in 2012 and met my partner that we kind of got into the furry scene, and I'm like, this has a certain appeal to it. And then I eventually created like an account on Furfinity, and I guess the rest is history. Like I kind of got into checking out different media, and eventually I read I consumed a lot of written media. Doc Slab was another one that I checked out fairly early on, and eventually I kind of looked at it and was like, there's something missing. What can I add? Is what I have to add worth it? Should I give it a shot? And it took forever. Like I didn't start writing until 2017, and it was my partner that kind of pushed me to write. They had been pushing me for a number of years. I had a little bit of a background writing in. It's funny too. I was actually for my high school yearbook, I was voted most likely to write my own novel. I don't think they necessarily suspected erotic TF, but it is what it is.
Still happened. At the end of the day, a
Exactly.
win's a win.
Pretty much. And like I did, my background is actually science biology, for my education, which again I'll get into for another one of your questions coming up. But yeah, I had like a little bit of like creative writing, and there's definitely a lot of scientific writing, and there's clearly a huge difference. Although again, I kind of blend those into my writing to a certain degree, I think. But yeah, no, I took off, and I eventually started getting requests, and I took them. Like you start out with your own ideas, and you write, and then basically what you want to write, and you put that out there, and people see that, and they request things, and eventually commission offers come up, and again the rest is history.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's a pretty good rundown of my TF career. And
Yeah, no, I think so. And, then I guess my follow-up question to that is like, and I just love the wording of this, like, like every TF fan has a tragic villain backstory, so what's yours? Like, was there something specific that happened that really pushed you into writing outside of, like your partner's encouragement and kind of seeing that there was a niche that wasn't being filled? Was there anything else there that really made you think, this is what I want to do? And particularly now that you kind of do it full time, like I could see myself doing this for a long period of time.
I guess fulfillment, feedback. I realized that I was like people really liked my work. Like I was enjoying writing it, but also I got a lot of good feedback. Like a lot of people were really interested, especially when I started getting requests in that, and I started like meeting a few friends through TF, and like started like RPing TF and that sort of thing, which I don't really do too much anymore, just with like close friends. But yeah, like the more positive feedback I got, the more encouraged I was to write. So I guess that's kind of the opposite of a tragic villain backstory. Um,
No, it still worked.
but yeah, no, I guess for me, and I want to talk about this a little bit further on, but TF has always been about escapism for me, and just that ability to, and like the first few stories I've written were more about that escapism aspect, and what would it be like to leave all of the stressors behind in a way that only turning into an animal and having that animal's mind would be able to give you. Like, without those the more negative aspects of humanity, I'll say, like, what,
Like grappling with the cosmic questions of existence.
exactly. And grappling with, like, mental illness and, like, questions like, am I good enough? What am I doing? Yeah, you're absolutely right. The cosmic questions of being human. It's like, what if you could escape that even for a brief bit of time? What would that be like?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think that a lot of people find an appeal in that because sometimes the world is just everything is happening everywhere all at once at the same time always, and it can be a lot. And there's definitely an appeal, I think, from an escapism lens within the realm of particularly feral animal TFs, because then you don't have to deal with that. You can just vibe in a field or wherever, right? So I definitely think that makes sense to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So then, one of the things that I've noticed in terms of your writing is that, and this is kind of a through line throughout all of your work, you often use transformation as an expression for facets of sexual orientation that can often be demeaned socially. So, in particular, there's a trope that I've noticed you've used in a lot of pieces where you have the changing sexual orientation from straight to gay. So, I was curious to know what kind of led you to focus on this trope in terms of some of your stories, particularly the ones that haven't been commissions but have been ones that you wrote for your own personal kind of enjoyment.
So for me, I came out very late in life, or later. I was very sexually repressed. Religion had a lot to do with it. I did not have the best childhood, and I won't get into that. Like, I'm sure a lot of us in the TF fandom can relate, but like, not the best parents, bullied at school. I experienced a lot of homophobic slurs, even though I did not know I was gay at the time, and that sort of led me to a lot of sexual repression and sexuality repression. Like, I thought I had to be interested in women, like, absolutely had to be interested in women. So, and I even tried having a few girlfriends here and there, and it wasn't working out, and I didn't know why. So it was actually kind of a bit later into my mid-20s when I was with my partner. My partner, for reference, is asexual, so we sort of had like an ongoing agreement, like, hey, if we date, you're totally fine to have physical relations with other people, just let me know. And that didn't feel right to me until they're like, hey, maybe you like men. And I'm like, no. and then I got thinking about it, and within our furry group, like, I guess somebody stepped forward, quote unquote, and I'm like, this feels right. Like, this works well. So it was kind of like through my partner allowing me that exploration that I discovered my own sexuality. And I guess that was something like really formative for me. And it was something that I guess that's one of the elements that I didn't see a lot in TF. Like, that meant a lot to me to be able to discover my own sexuality. So, like, looking back on everything, like, in my life, the whole straight to gay trope, I sort of write it in a sense where I'm turning it on its head. It's that allowment for wish fulfillment. Like, that, the characters have that sort of unknown desire, to explore with the same sex. And I use men just because that's my own, like, I try to write within my own sphere of knowledge. Like, I'm sure there's definitely, I hope there's a lot more writers out there who write within their own spheres that encompass other elements of, like, other people's sexuality, especially, like, women or non-binary gender fluid individuals, because that representation definitely needs to be out there too. And I hope if it's not there, I hope somebody who has those experiences steps up to the plate to write their experiences. But again, that's an aside. But yeah, like, for me, it's just been the allowment of this being okay by writing these scenarios where the TF allows you to, like, part of your changing instincts, part of the change in mentality, as well as, the physical aspects, allows you to do something that turns the head of the societal trope, especially, and it's gotten better. now.
Oh yeah, of
Absolutely it's
course.
gotten better, but like when I grew up, it was absolutely unacceptable to be gay. And like the few people I knew in my school who were gay and who are gay, and I still communicate with them now, like they were really ostracized and they really had it hard. And like part of me wishes I knew I was gay, but I also wouldn't be able to express that until later in life anyway, just from coming from a small town, heavily religious. But yeah, I think I like writing the sort of allowment for that, where I use TF as the sort of the median for, oh, I have an excuse to be gay because these instincts are telling me to be gay. Oh, I actually like this now. Actually, the part that's still me, aside from the instincts, also likes this now that I've tried it. And I think that's something I really enjoy exploring.
And I have to mention this as well. Like, I think a lot of folks, particularly the younger folks who weren't around for these times, like the 90s and the aughts were not a great time to be gay, unfortunately. Like, being queer in those times, or trans, was not a good time. And the level of, like, things still aren't perfect. They're definitely not even like necessarily great, but the progress that has happened within the past like 15 20 years even, I think, has been almost like whiplash inducing in a good way, because I remember going to school at a young age, and I went through the Catholic system in Ontario, which is a whole other thing. But I went through the Catholic system, and yeah, it's not great to be someone who doesn't fully understand their own identity from either a sexual or gender perspective, and kind of have to go through that education and be told certain things, and then have to kind of unlearn and unpack that kind of self-hatred that can form it later on in life. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting that you've kind of leveraged in a way all of those experiences that you had, and you've put them into your writing to flip them on their head, and to also kind of, it sounds like, work a few things out for yourself too. Would you say that's correct?
I would definitely say that's correct. There were a few stories, and I alluded to this earlier, but there were a few stories like on the TSA that were heavily gay themed, and there were a few on Docs Lab that were heavily gay themed, and I remember reading them. One was by, oh, I can't remember their name. It was called Ass, and it was where two people are cursed by a witch at a fair, and they go to a cabin and they start turning into donkeys, but first they start essentially having sex with each other and getting like urges with each other, and like throughout the course of the story they like slowly turn into donkeys the more that they fuck. And that was one that really stuck out in my mind because Dogwood was the author, and they unfortunately seem to have dropped off the face of the earth. Unfortunately, because
Unfortunately.
they had a lot of really cool themes, that a lot of really good straight to gay themes, and I think that was one of the influences. But yeah, that was one I read, and I'm like, it really interested me, and I remember reading it over and over, and I felt a lot of guilt with that, because I'm like, I kept telling myself I'm just reading it to the TF, I'm reading it for the humiliation, but really the straight to gay aspect was doing it for me. There was another one on the TSA called A Marked Man, and
Oh yeah, I've read
yeah,
that
there's
one.
some interspecies there, but it was essentially a guy being punished by a pack of sentient wolves, or wyvern, I think they call themselves, sort of fucked into the pack, quite literally, and part of the process, he really gets into it.
Yes.
And there's that aspect where he's like, oh no, this can't be happening, but at the same time, wow, now I'm aroused by what's going on, and is eventually turned into one of the wolves, and joins the pack and welcomes not only the change in species but the change in sexuality, because all of the wolves are essentially gay. Like they're
Yes.
very gay, and they're very open about essentially orgies and that sort of thing. So that was another one. I convinced myself it was because of the TF I liked it, but really it was the gay aspect. And I felt a
Yeah,
lot of guilt
that makes sense.
for that for a few years. Um,
Hmm.
but it was one, like, when I started writing, and after I explored the escapism aspect of TF, I really got to thinking, the straight to gay thing, like, there's not as much representation as I would like. I need to put that out there. And a lot of my early straight to gay works were RPs with like friends and my now boyfriend. I'm poly, by the way. I should probably specify. I have a non-binary partner I live with, and I have a boyfriend that lives in the U.S. So a lot of the stories that I've written kind of for myself are based on the RPs with my boyfriend, my now boyfriend, and we both kind of explore that straight to gay aspect. We explored that together, and it just ended up really working out well for a dynamic that translates to like other aspects of sexuality as well.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that it was once you kind of found another person that was also into it that you were able to kind of explore it to degree like in like personal RPs. Because I know that as someone who also wasn't sure where they were at first and, formally was like very much heavily in the like male sphere, I find it interesting that the topic seems to come up quite a bit. I find not in like stories, but in like personal RPs, because I had a lot of experience when I was starting to get into the TF community of having like RPs, and people would specifically say, "Oh, like I want my character that we're doing this RP. I want them to be straight at first, so that then they become gay through the portion of the TF." And that wasn't what I would do with my character, but I noticed that it would come up a lot. And whenever I have then seen it in stories, and it doesn't come up often, so hence why I'm asking about it coming up in your work, whenever it does come off, it makes me think about that. And I think about, you know, the struggles that a lot of queer men have in terms of coming to terms with their sexuality and then kind of working that out in a way through transformation media, be it through like personal role playing, reading stories, or something else like that. And I guess I find it interesting that I don't see it more in written stories, because I know for a fact that those role play things are happening and that trope does come up quite a bit.
Yeah, there was definitely. I definitely found it lacking. Like there were a few stories that I'd mentioned, but like there weren't really a lot of other media out there, and I'm glad to. I take a lot of pride in being able to provide that media. I have gotten a few comments from people being like, "Hey, I didn't quite think I was gay, but oh, I read your story." And these are like people in their like early 20s, like kind of where I was. And I mean, like again, I welcome anybody who reads any story that I write and be like, this does something for their like sexuality or gender orientation. I write within the sphere that I know, because I strongly feel that because I'm cisgender, like I feel like I don't have a place to tell those stories, but I still hope that regardless of somebody's sexuality or gender identification, if they get something out of my stories where they're just like, oh, this is this character allowed to experience this, maybe I could. Like, I take a lot of personal pride in that. Like, I welcome the ability to guide somebody else through their own journey through my work. And I've gotten a little bit of feedback on that subject, and that means a lot to me.
Yeah, and I will say that as someone who has wrestled with their gender identity, like the pieces of media and the things that I took into account as I kind of wrestled with that, oftentimes were not explicitly written about, someone wrestling with their gender identity. You can see a lot of analogies in different pieces of
Mm-hmm.
work, so it doesn't surprise me that it may have been an awakening on those axes, even though that wasn't necessarily what you were writing about or thinking about when you were writing it. People, and I speak from personal experience, but I also speak just from hearing other people say this, people will look for representation, but sometimes they will find it in the strangest of places. And it's kind of wild to think that, like, oh, yes, I'm looking for TF porn. And also, maybe I'm questioning whether or not I am a man. Like, that seems very off the wall. And, like, it's like, why would you go to TF porn to look for that? But people do. And it can be really illuminating. And so I guess, as part of this long tangent, I guess my kind of follow up question there is, were there any other like kind of surprising things that you discovered about yourself because of, going through this queer awakening in terms of engaging with TF media?
I actually have a disappointing answer. No. Just to put it bluntly, it was really like I have a lot of people very close to me who are non-binary, who have explored aspects of the gender identity, and that didn't sit well with me personally. I'm comfortable with my own gender.
Yeah.
It was really just the sexuality, like the interest in other men really resonated for me. Like there have been specific interests in terms of TF that have come up, but in terms of my own identity,
Okay, yeah.
it was just the awakening of me being gay that really stuck
Yeah.
out. But like I said, I absolutely welcome, and if people are able to find aspects of their own gender identity within their journey in my work, I'm absolutely elated to hear that and to know that. But I know that isn't something, again, it's not something I write because it's not something within my personal sphere of experience. But I do write some TFTGs, as I actually write quite a number of them on commission. But
That was the next thing I was going to mention actually, because I was going to say I've seen you explore gender changes in your work. Obviously, like you said, more on like the commission side, and I feel like you do a good job handling it. So that's why I was curious as to whether or not you had discovered anything else. But also, I think that in terms of what you just said, like, and this isn't shade at anyone. I mean this in a loving way. Like a lot of cis people don't think about their gender identity at all.
mhm,
So the fact that you even have thought about it, I think is really, really good. And like if you feel comfortable with it, that's a good thing. Like, that's what everyone should feel comfortable within
absolutely,
whatever gender identity they have.
yeah.
So the fact that you've been able to kind of write within these topics and, still have like this very strong sense of where you feel comfortable from a gender perspective, I think is a really good sign.
And just like the understanding that there are multiple options for gender identity. There are,
Yeah.
yeah, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different like expressions and different ways that are all within the realm of human experience.
Mhm.
And it's an absolutely wonderful thing that should be celebrated. Like, absolutely, yeah, because we're all human at the end of the day, and unfortunately, but yeah, no, it's definitely like it's a wonderful, like, exploring yourself and being on that journey is really a wonderful thing, and it should be celebrated. And it really sucks that it isn't in a lot of places. Yeah, and I hope things get better.
I really do too. And then I guess, like kind of my last question then on this kind of area is then, given that it's not your own personal experience, generally when you do write the pieces that touch on gender changes, do you ever struggle with any aspects of writing them, or does it come still naturally, even if it's not necessarily your area of expertise?
I got some feedback from some people who are more knowledgeable about these sorts of things than I am, so I've just sort of used those lessons to kind of formulate how I write. I have a lot of experience with like anatomy, and I'll get into that a little bit later, I think. But like the anatomical changes aren't too difficult for me to write, and I strongly feel that the people commissioning me, would find this as an elating experience. So I try to write from that standpoint. It's either elating as in they like it immediately, or it's humiliating but they end up liking it anyway, and that's another sort of head turn, or another like 360, where the humiliation aspect allows you to explore the enjoyment of it through that wheel turn.
No, I get what you mean. And I think it's interesting you phrase that because, I've noticed in terms of your writing, you do tend to try to tackle some other taboos that are kind of outside of just sexual orientation. And, in particular, I've noticed that you've broached particularly taboo topics and situations that are not limited to, but include things like, upside down TF, body horror, defecation, urination, humiliation, all that kind of stuff. So I was curious to ask you a little bit more as to what the impetus was towards examining those scenarios within the context of TF.
Well, I need to break those down a little bit because there's different facets of why I delve into those topics. Looking at, I'll take the bodily functions and the humiliation. I'll kind of categorize that into the same, where it's the humiliation aspect allows the reader to enjoy what's going on by being humiliated, if that makes sense. I feel like, especially like the bodily function stuff, like I feel it's all par for the course of like post TF. First of all, like if you're an animal, like your physiology is fundamentally different, and you had a wonderful guest on. I think it was episode 4. Their knowledge of anatomy is far superior to mine, but they were talking about like horses have a massive cecum, so they're like more gassy. So it's like, it's just like a facet of your body is different, your bodily functions are going to be different, and there's that like exploration of, this is biological fact. So there's like that, and then there's also the humiliation aspect. It's like it allows a lens for you to look at something that you quote unquote societally shouldn't like, but it gives you a lens to look at that in a way that allows you to like it, where you're being embarrassed of it, but it still has to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
So I like to kind of explore that through that outlook. Like it is something that some people might enjoy. Some people might like enjoy having like those differences in physiology. For some people, it might be freeing. Like your bovines, your equines, like they're very sort of free with their bodily functions.
Yeah, they just go.
Exactly. So it's like that might be freeing for some people, but that also might be embarrassing. So bringing that up in a humiliating setting where you're like TFing and like you just need to go, and you're being shamed for it, it allows people to like enjoy those things even if they're a little bit embarrassed of them. And I feel that's kind of like where I'm coming at it from. And that's the same. I guess that pretty much covers the humiliation aspect too. Like any kind of humiliation allows you to, it gives you an excuse to like something where societally, you're taught not to like it, or you might have trepidation in order to like it. The body horror comes from my love of horror in general. I consume a lot of like horror literature. Like these days it's through like podcasts, but there's like a lot of amazing horror writers out there. And it's that fear aspect, like fear of the unknown, fear of these horrific things that you would never want to happen to you, but they're kind of cool to explore once you get past that fear. So I don't write enough body horror for my interests. I would love to write more. It's not something that I'm commissioned on very often. When I open next, maybe I'll take some more body horror. Hint, hint. But
Hint, hint.
but it is something I do like to explore from that like sort of like that horror, that fear aspect, where these things are. I guess it does kind of tie into the humiliation. Like it's exploring something that is taboo through that lens of this is horrible. I would never want this to happen to me, but what if?
Right.
Yeah,
It's like almost giving yourself permission to indulge in something that maybe you shouldn't.
exactly. And yeah, I guess that does kind of summarize the entire repertoire of all of that. And Upside Down TF is another one that I would love to write more from an anatomical standpoint. That is like, it's really interesting. But I was only commissioned the once. And it's not for, like, that sort of thing is not for everybody. Like, that was a friend who commissioned me. I wasn't sure I was going to post it originally. I've gotten some odd requests, and I won't get into what they were. They were within my sphere of morality. Like, I wouldn't write anything that I was not comfortable with. But there are certain things I don't want to be known for, because I'm not interested in those things, but I'm also a whore that will take people's money.
I mean, girl, same. I'm the same way. So
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah.
No, but like, so long as it doesn't go against my spectrum of morality, so long as it's not hurting anybody, it's like something, like there are a few, like I don't want to be known for those things, but it is something that I will consider exploring if people, and I generally charge a little bit more, but it's not something I want to be known for. It's not within my sphere of interests, so it's not something I'll typically like post.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that particularly when it comes to some of these other ones that you have kind of posted, I think that, and I'll use Upside Down TF as kind of the example here because I am a big fan of it. But yeah, it's not for everyone. And I think that with that one, there is a unique kind of marriage between what you described for the body horror and what you described for the autonomous, bodily functions, all kind of in one. It's kind of like the ultimate of those two. And I know that it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and there's definitely artists who will do it and then will be like, I don't want to post this because again, I don't want to be known as that person. And to be clear, there are artists out there who it is their thing, and like hats off to them because they're out here doing, they're doing great, amazing work. But yeah, I totally get not wanting to necessarily being known as like the person to do those things because I guess, and maybe this is a kind of something I can turn back to, like, do you feel like it almost boxes you in a little bit? Like if you become known as like the person who will engage with these taboos, do you worry that you will be kind of like cordoned off and only get requests in that area in terms of commissions?
There's certain aspects I'm worried about, but like certain things I'm like down to explore a little bit more, like the upside down, and I'm pretty sure I did some cock TF in that same story, but like I'm down to explore that a little bit more, but like I don't want to necessarily be known for it.
Yes.
But then again, ultimately at the end of the day, I'm in control of what I post, so I'm able to look at my what I'm posting objectively and be like, if I want to do a little bit of an upside down TF as a treat, I can like I can post a little bit. If I get more commissions for it and I feel like it's a little bit too much, then I don't have to post them all, and I make that clear with my commissioners as well. So I feel that sort of the percentage of what I do gets represented. Like, I love doing straight to gay. I love doing sort of were creatures, male were creatures. I love doing barnyard animals. I love doing donkeys. I love doing horses. So I feel that that makes up a significant percentage of my my library. So like people will look and be like, "Hey, this is the guy who really likes to do donkey TFs." Like I hope that comes across. It comes across more on my Patreon actually, just because I tend to attract a lot of people who really like that, and I like my Patreon. Like I try to do a monthly story within like for my patrons, and it's mostly like public opinion. Like I'll have a bunch of ideas, I'll let people vote on them. The donkey ones generally win, so I have a lot of, which I'm totally fine with. I love exploring straight to gay donkey stuff. It's so fun to write. It never gets old. Like Pleasure Island, it's a trope for a reason.
It is.
And I'm extremely happy with like all of the donkey stuff I've written. And again, some people are like, "Oh man, I love your donkey stuff. I want to call me for donkey stuff," and that comes up. But like, I try to. But anyway, to sort of circle back to what we're talking about, like I try to make sure that my gallery is percentage wise is indicative of what I like to write. In terms of like what I take on for commissions, like it tends to be a certain percentage of what I like to write as well. Like I have people who are like dedicated to particular aspects of like the body horror, or even like the not necessarily body horror, but like what would it be like to be a bug? What would it be like to be this? Even though it's like horrific to transform into, like what are the senses like? What is it like to be this creature? And like some people really like that, so I try to like make that a subset of my work, because like there are other people who will see that and be like, "Hey, this is new, this is different. Oh, this might awaken something in me."
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that because I've noticed, of course, this also extends to species as well. Like you've keyed into a very varied selection of species, and that includes things like you said, insects, slugs, fish, some aliens. I was curious to know, like, how do you approach stories that are focused on less common species? Like, is there a particular way you try to go about writing them to make them like more appealing?
So that one comes twofold. I have a master's in biology, behavioral studies, but that's besides the point. I have taken a lot of anatomy courses for various invertebrates and vertebrates, and I have also, in my master's, have taught it. So I'm very well versed in the anatomy of like tons of different phylum of animals, essentially, and I like to, first of all, I like to draw on those skills. Like, it doesn't take very much to, obviously, I don't do it every day. Like again, you had a guest in episode 4 of this season who does that exclusively. And, like, their anatomic knowledge is, like, leagues beyond mine. It doesn't take much to, like, refresh that information, and I like to use it. Like, it's really cool to, like, write an obscure species and be like, oh, these are the body parts, and this is how the legs of a slug, for example, like your legs would be gone, but like your respiratory system, goes through your skin, and you have like the internal shell of the cochlea, and like there's like so many really neat things to explore from an anatomical TF perspective. And there's also the sensory aspect. It's like, what would it be like to be this animal based on the senses? How would they differ from ours? What are those people who are in my stories who are being TF'd experience?
No, I think that makes sense. And, I think that that comes through in the writing that you do. I think that it really does key into what the mindset would be, and also like the description of the anatomical changes, I think really comes through. Like you clearly have done your research when you're doing and describing these changes, which I think really adds to the overall believability of the story. Because, there's always an element of suspending your disbelief when you're reading a TF story. And,
No, exactly.
if you don't describe things properly, it can stick out like a sore thumb. So I think that being able to speak from that kind of educated or like knowledgeable lens, I think it really does enhance the writing itself.
I never want to get a comment from somebody who knows more than I do, being like, "You did this wrong." So I strive to research, so I will not get that comment.
Yes.
And again, because I have that background, it doesn't take much for me to like refresh on like those anatomical aspects. But like, I never want to like get the comment, "You did the anatomy wrong." I'd be like, "Damn it, I didn't do enough research." But yeah, that's what I try to go in like I try to go in looking through that lens of somebody who knows more than I do, and like trying to make it as close as I can as possible, so that I don't so that I wouldn't upset an expert in the field who's also into TF.
So then, in terms of like, we've talked about the less common species, we've talked about the taboos. How has those stories that touch on the more taboo topics gone over with your audience? Like, have they generally been supportive, or have you received any pushback towards including some of the taboo topics or the less common species that we've talked about here into your stories? Like, do you find those stories underperform from a metrics standpoint, or is there still an audience for them? And I guess I'm curious to know what the response has been from people who have engaged with it and reached out to you to talk about them.
Well, first of all, they do underperform from a metric standpoint, because I do try to like keep track of like what stories are getting the most attention. You're able to do that on FA. But ultimately, I feel that there's a niche for them. There are certain people who love them, who want more of them. It's a smaller subset of TF fans, to be sure, but it's also a smaller subset of my work. So I feel that it's representative of the amount that I do, that people enjoy them. A funny story, I actually got some pushback on Straight to Gay on my Patreon.
Oh.
Yeah, like, I actually got somebody who was like, "Hey, you write amazing insect stuff, but you do too much Straight to Gay, and I can't support you anymore." So it's like,
Oh, interesting.
I know, right? It's just like, maybe you didn't quite look at what I do.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you're on the Patreon and you didn't know that that was what you were writing, I'm questioning whether or not you actually read your stuff in advance. Like it's pretty evident.
Yeah. But like, I largely feel that like people will read what they're interested in, and they'll avoid what they don't like. And I try to make it like pretty clear with like my icons that I've been making for my FA, like what to expect. So like, if you're not gonna like a certain species, or you're not gonna like a certain topic, I hope to make it clear what that species and what that topic will be, so you can avoid it if that's not your thing. But I have found that there are some of these topics kind of awaken something in some people, where it's like, "Oh, I didn't think," I mean, I've gotten some feedback on that as well. It's like, "I wouldn't think I'd like a slug TF, but I read your slug TF," and I'm like, "Oh, this was surprisingly good." I actually had a self-awakening. I wrote a giant moth TF recently,
Okay.
and I'm like, I was writing it, and I'm like, I'm probably not going to like this. And I'm reading, like, the person who commissioned me wrote a very detailed description of what they wanted. Like, extremely, like, it was a 50-point thing about what they wanted, which,
Wow.
yeah, and again, that comes with commissions. Like, some people will give a very general, and they're just like, "Yeah, you write how I really like, so I'm just going to give you free reign." And some people are like, "I want this, 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 this." And I'm kind of fine with either, to be honest. Like, I aim to please, and if somebody wants to give me a 50-point bulletin, I make sure those 50 points are in the story. And I know they're going to be happy with it. Well, at least I hope they would be happy with it if I
Yeah.
include this 50. Yeah, I hope they're happy with it. I feel fairly confident that they would be happy with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, like, the whole, like, the person being cocooned and turning into a moth within the cocoon, I'm like, that kind of awakened something in me. I'm like, oh, I'm into this.
It's very cool. Like
Yeah.
just the biological process itself is really cool. So incorporating that into a TF, in my opinion, is very cool.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I like to draw on. It's like, life is kind of funny in terms of like what we do and what we end up doing. Like, you never know what particular aspects of what you're doing now will mean something 5 years, 10 years down the road. Like, I feel I've been able to incorporate most facets of my life into my writing somewhere, and it kind of gives it all meaning. It's something that again, I take a lot of pride in. Like, I'm somebody with like severe depression and anxiety. I'm medicated for it, and life did not go the way I had planned, as it has for many people, especially with the whole promise of the fake dream of, oh, you can just go to university and get a job. Like, that has long since fallen by the wayside. But like the fact that I'm able to take my biology degree and write anatomical TFs that people really enjoy and get paid for it, it just kind of brings meaning to everything. It's really fulfilling.
Yeah, it's kind of, in a way, it's almost like, oh, the universe does kind of have a funny sense of humor sometimes. And
Yeah,
this is one of those cases.
yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I guess my last kind of question on this point, and I guess I kind of touched on this, but to kind of circle back to it, when it comes to these kinds of stories that are touching on these taboos or these lesser commonly used species, do you feel like they have an appeal that doesn't need to reach a broader audience, or do you think that when you're writing those stories, you are trying to at least reach more people and bring them into those kinds of interests?
I've gotten some feedback from people that have said, like, hey, I'm not normally into this kind of TF, but you wrote it so well. And I feel that's kind of where I'm going with it. Like, I try to write it as good as I can for the people who like it. I'm not necessarily aiming to draw in new people, but if I do, that's a bonus. Because it's not going to appeal to everybody. Like, these are very, like, more obscure TFs. And if I try to write the best I can, and I do that with every piece I write. I do my best to try to bring the piece to life. And at least I know a lot of people are enjoying the pieces for the writing, if not the TF itself. They're like, hey, I'm not into Cockroach TF, but this piece was written really well. So I could at least enjoy it from that perspective. And I've gotten that feedback a few times too. And at the end of the day, that's all I can aim for.
I think that makes sense. I think doing your best job, but also like casting the net to be as wide as possible for everyone who has an open mind towards it, I think is a good approach. And if you're satisfying at the very least the people who are really into it and then allowing room for people who might not be into it but are curious to at least enjoy the writing, I think that's a good balance. Nice. So then, one of the things that I did want to also ask, and we've kind of like touched on this at various points throughout this conversation, like you have a very impressive output as a full-time writer. Your gallery is filled to the brim with TF stories. They come out very regularly. I know you produce content for Patreon as well. So, you write quite a bit. And so I was curious to know how you tackle the writing process so that you can have such proclivity. Because I know that for a number of people, it can be difficult to get into the groove, let alone be as productive as often you are. So, like, how do you tackle that process overall?
Childhood trauma. No.
It can help in some cases.
It does.
I do feel that. In different ways, I do feel that.
Oh.
Uh,
But no, I do in serious. Well, I guess the childhood trauma is kind of serious. It's kind of dark but serious. But I also try to approach it from the standpoint that I'm working a full-time job. So like I try to my partner who I live with works a full-time job. So we get up at the same time, thereabouts. Like they'll go to their job and I'll like walk downtown, I'll get my coffee, I'll come back, I'll sit and work for 5 to 6 hours. I'll get up and take breaks intermittently, and I have like a certain goal. I'll assign various goals as tasks. So like maybe one task is write 1,000 words in the story, maybe one task is edit a 7,000 word document. And like I'll set a goal where I like achieve 3 to 5 tasks in a day, and like they might take like each task might take an hour, depending on my productivity, and depending on like how I'm feeling that particular day. But yeah, I treat it like a full-time job, and I break down individual pieces. I generally work on multiple stories at once, so that if I feel a little bit burnt out on one story, my energy might go better to another story. Which, I guess, using the restaurant model might not be the best thing for some clients, because I might end up feeling more motivated to write a story. And it's like if you're in a restaurant and you see that table come in after you and they get their food first, and you're just like, why didn't my food come out? And that's another huge thing about what I do as a business. I am and I've gotten this feedback from people too, I'm very communicative. I'm very up on. I'm always refreshing my socials. I probably should stay off my socials more, but again, my socials are my work. So, like, if anybody messages me at any time of day, I will see it immediately.
I feel that.
Like, you messaged me about the podcast at like 2 a.m, and I woke up and saw that and answered.
I'm sorry I woke you up. Oh my gosh.
You didn't wake me up. I just happened to wake up and see that message, and I'm just like, I'm going to answer immediately.
Good. Okay. Because I am a bit of a gremlin, unfortunately, when
No
it comes
worries.
to my hours. So anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, but I try to respond as quickly as I can. I try to deal with issues as soon as they come up. But yeah, I guess essentially just treating it as a full-time job, working where I can to keep that productivity up, even if I'm like stuck on one story, even if I have like writer's block in one story, I'm at least writing in another story and able to come back, and divvying up a story into pieces helps. And like, maybe I can't write this full story, but I can write 500 words on it today, and maybe tomorrow I can write another 500 words, and it eventually comes out in the end. I was out east on a vacation to see family, and on a plane ride home, I wrote like 7,000 words to a werewolf TF because I was like super into the idea.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and that just kind of happens, and this is the nice thing about being a writer and having everything on Google Docs is I can technically work from anywhere just on my phone. Like, the phone is not the most preferable media to write on, but I mean, it's like, hey, if I'm able to write, like, and that's another thing with productivity too. I'm always writing. I'm writing right now. No, I'm kidding.
I wouldn't fault you if you were, but I
No.
appreciate that.
But that's kind of the joke. Like, even in my hobbies, if there's like a Darren point, because I play a lot of trading card games as a hobby, and even if there's like 10 minutes in a round, I'm on my phone writing a couple hundred words. So it's like, I'm always writing, but I'm trying not to write too much because I don't want to burn out, because I have burnt out and that sucks. And that just slows down the whole process.
Hmm. And that was honestly going to be my next question, because, like, burnout and in particular writer's block can be a big deal for a lot of people. I know that back when I still indulged from time to time in writing, I would hit writer's block and not know what to do. So I guess my question is, do you ever have to kind of grapple with that sort of writer's block? And then B, how do you generally work through it, given that you've kind of set this standard for yourself of writing so much so often?
Well, I think it goes back to the working on multiple stories at once. If I'm stuck at one story, then I can move to another one. I've taken the practice of writing an outline for my stories. The way my mind works is that if I know what I'm doing, I tend to be better at doing it. If I have clear instruction, I'm very good at achieving tasks. So if for example, I'm going to take the werewolf story I wrote yesterday, because I know it's a friend of mine, and it's a client that I have quite often. And I'm going to make him listen to the episode, so he'll definitely hear this.
I support it.
Shout out to Tarek. But, like, I know he likes, like, American Werewolf in London style pain into pleasure. So I know what he likes. I'm able to outline it. I'm able to... And it's kind of the theme of writing anatomical TFs and or erotica. People tend to want a very specific thing, and they want more of that specific thing. So while the scenarios are different, largely the end result is the same, and I'm able to outline that in various steps to get to the end point, because I know what that end point will be. And that's generally what the clients want, especially with erotica. Like, you're into a certain thing, you want that, but in like a slightly different package. Like, you don't want, like, for example, I'll just use werewolf TF as an example, but like you'll want a werewolf TF, you'll eventually, you'll want those painful changes, and then you'll want pleasure, and then you'll want orgasm, you'll want either fucking or like masturbation or whatever the particular. When you read another werewolf story, you're going to be looking for those triggers that turn you on, and they are going to be similar triggers. But you're not going to go to the same story generally. You're not going to go to the same story over and over and over, and it gets boring. So you want that sort of, and I'm guilty of it. Well, it's not guilt, it's human nature, I think, largely. But, like, I'll read other people's stories, like, for Donkey Transformation, for example, and I want the same things in those stories. But I want, like, a new story that's a different scenario with different people, but hits those same points. So it becomes... formulaic, but I don't want to use formulaic in a negative context, which it normally would be. I love formulas.
Yeah, they can be so helpful. You put one thing in and you know what you're going to get out.
Exactly. I love that. I love knowing what I'm doing. I love knowing that what I'm doing will please my client and my my fan base. And I absolutely love like knowing that like this is what people want. I love knowing how to do that. And I love just going through and powering through it. That's just part of my process, and that's what really brings me joy.
Honestly, that whole formula thing, to me, that's like, ah, yes, that's the STEM degree talking right there.
No, I'm sure it's definitely the same for your work as well. Like, absolutely.
No, it definitely is. And, I will say, on the topic of going back to stories, and I'm going to show my ass a little bit to the chat here, like there is a particular genre of story that I really like around like mannequin TFs. And I go back to the same ones every time, because they just do that specific something, and it doesn't matter that I'm reading the same thing all the time. So I say this to say, you never know sometimes when you write a story, it might be that, old faithful that specific people will just go back to over and over again because they like it so much because it spoke to them.
I do the same. I'll go back to certain stories that really do it for me. But like if those writers were prolific and they wrote another story that was like in that same vein, I would be all over that.
Oh yeah, 100%. I definitely agree there. So then, we kind of talked about the writer's block. You mentioned you're trying to avoid burnout. Have you had to deal with burnout before? And if so, like, how did you get yourself out of that pit of like just being completely burned out?
It involves lying in bed for like 24 hours and just crying myself to sleep.
That's a mood. That's a mood.
No, but I generally try to avoid that because that's kind of like the worst case scenario, and I don't want to be in that mindset. But I am working. It is a work in progress because I'm really bad at self-care. But like taking a few days off, and I have the luxury. Like I absolutely do, even though I never take days off. I schedule myself to do the sort of like Western European model where it's like you take 6 weeks off a year. So I try to like work on that model because I think that is fair and reasonable in a society where you treat human beings like human beings. And unfortunately, in North America, we don't do that.
No, we don't.
We really don't. But I think like a lot of like the Western Europe countries do have that model where you pay your employees a living wage and also give them like 6 weeks of vacation. So they can like travel, they can go to cottages. So like for me, because my boyfriend lives in the US, I go see my boyfriend or have him come up here. So like I'll take like 4 weeks a year to see him. We do like, to make it worthwhile, we do like 2 weeks at a time. Like it's just, yeah, exactly. And then like I'll take a week off for my birthday and I'll take a week off for Christmas because that's a big one for me. But I'm still kind of bad because I'll still like, if I'm traveling to see the boyfriend, I have an 8-hour flight period so I'll be sitting on the phone and writing and I shouldn't be doing that. Or, the boyfriend's got to go do something. I'll like, I have like half an hour. I'm going to edit a few pages of a story.
That efficiency bug.
I know. And that goes back to the childhood trauma. Never doing enough. But, it is a work in progress. I am like trying to, if like something that comes out that really attracts my interest, like a new video game or like a new card game set that I want to test for like one of my TCGs, I try to let myself get into that if I'm really feeling it and allow myself that break. Because when I do go back to writing, I'm refreshed. Because like when you're trying to write and there's something else on your mind, like you're not like, if you're like really, okay, I need to like get through this so I can do fun thing. I'm in a position where I can just do fun thing. And I'm trying to allow myself to do fun thing when fun thing comes up. And that helps refresh me as well. So as to prevent burnout.
That makes sense to me. And then, in terms of potential like tips or advice for any writers who are trying to go full time, like how would you suggest they try to hone their writing process for efficiency without having childhood trauma? Like, is there a way to be efficient without that?
So I kind of touched on this in like sort of my my getting into TF, but like you want to start out by writing what you love. Like, I, for example, found that niche of straight to gay that I didn't see enough, and I wanted to write more of it. So if you're looking at like my writing or some of the other writers that are prolific, and there, can I just take an aside and say that there are just not enough TF writers?
Yes, please preach. It's true.
I cannot, like, as much as, I love money and patrons and people supporting me, I cannot keep up with the demand. I think there's only one or two other writers who write TF full time.
I think Kate Marquette does it.
Kate Marquette does. I love her work.
She's great, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Kate Marquette if she listens to it. Maybe we could chat sometime. But but I think like she's the only one that I know does it as a business. Like there are just not, and like she's never able to take commissions because she's got her Patreon going, and like I'm always closed for commissions. Like I'm way behind because I have a bad habit of saying yes to everybody.
Yeah, I feel that.
So I want to write all these commissions, and then I've got like friends that I want to do trades with, like Travis is one, because he does amazing photo manips. So it's like, yeah, and we've known each other for a while. He's like one of the earliest people to commission me. So like I want to do trades with him, and I know he's super busy with work, but again, we communicate, and I love doing like trades with people. AJ is another one whom who I'm working with trades on, and I want to do all these trades with people. And I've also got proofreaders that want to work for trades.
Ah, I see.
And I've got all of those people, and then I've got my commissions, and I'm like, I've said yes to too many people, so I guess the long story short, I'm never able to open. Or I'm like able to open at like certain periods, and I fill up immediately. There just aren't enough TF writers.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that this is something I've noticed as well, just in terms of, making this podcast. Like in our first season, we had like two writers on, and I've definitely tried to put more of a focus on having people who do TF writing this season, because I hope that some people will take that the words of these TF writers to heart and be like, oh, maybe I can produce my own content too. Because I agree. I think there's just kind of a dearth of people who do it full time, and even to some degree, people who just do it for fun. Like there's plenty of people who do TF writing and it's not their full time job, and they do put out some amazing stuff, but they're not able to do it more frequently. And there is something to be said about the written word, and there are things that you can do within that medium that you can't do from an art perspective, be it digital, traditional, or like photo manipulation. So I also wish there were more TF writers out there, and I hope that if there are any that are interested, they can take some of this advice to account, because I think that, again, there is an opportunity. There's definitely a niche there for people to do it. And if you can hone your skills and build an audience, like, to be frank, like there's money to be made there. So,
yeah. Before I give the formulaic advice, I just want to say that I feel extremely blessed that I'm able to do it full time. Like, I am so thankful for the support. There are people who like throw so much money at me and they don't want anything in return. They just want to see me succeed, and I am so thankful, to the point I'm actually kind of tearing up. I'm so thankful for those people who support me and who want to see me succeed, and without them I wouldn't be able to do this. And I just want to thank people. Like, the fact that I'm able to do this full time is because of the support that I get, and it's something I do not take for granted. But for people who are interested in getting into it, like I have kind of alluded to before, look at what's there for writing and write what you feel is missing. Write what you're looking for that you're not quite getting enough of, and start there. And write a few stories, post them, and then see who looks at them. See who reads them. You had I think it was Kieran, talking about networking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Networking, like, when people read your stories and give you feedback, respond to them, thank them. If people give shouts on your wall, say, hey, thanks for the shout. If people watch you, I try not to be too obsessive, because some people don't like shouts on their wall. Like, obviously, if somebody likes all of your work, don't give them a shout every time. I've moved to, if somebody watches me, I thank them for the watch. I don't thank them for each fave, because it's like, yeah, because that gets a little bit redundant and people don't necessarily want that. But hey, if people are going to watch me, I'll be like, I'll thank them. I'll extend the olive branch, not the olive branch, but like I'll extend the invitation, because that's a wrong analogy, but I'll extend the, yeah, that's a totally different but I will like leave that opening if they want to like communicate with me. When I was starting out, eventually people started giving requests, and I'm like, I'll do the requests. I'll put it out as much content as I can, as I'm able, because I was working full time when I started. But yeah, like I got some requests. I did the requests for people. Eventually, you'll get the one person that'll offer money for what you're doing.
Yes.
Yeah, I find the worst part about being a full time writer is what to charge people.
Yeah, it's the eternal question.
I know I need to up my prices because my prices are really low and have been for a while. But like I don't want to like be like, oh, surprise guys, price increase. I want to be like, hey, at this period, when commissions come out, I will need to increase. But like at the same time, it's like it's really hard to know what to charge because nobody charges what they're worth.
Yes,
Everybody undersells themselves.
this is true. I will just say on that point, it is a struggle, but people really should charge what they're worth to the extent that they feel comfortable doing so. And I know that might sound a little bit wishy-washy, but like people should feel like they can charge what they're worth because so much time and effort can go into creating some of these pieces of work on the back end. And, people deserve to make a living wage. And, at the end of the day, our content is, in essence, to some degree, it is a luxury, and so it should be like charged as such. Now, obviously, when you are doing it for your full-time business model, I recognize that's not necessarily the approach you want to take. But I will say that, I have found in the past that people are pretty understanding about pricing increases. I know that for the longest time, I didn't increase mine. And then, like, at one point, I started doing it like by $5 increments. And then in the past year, I was like, no, like, inflation's crazy. And also, I should be charging more. So, like, no matter what the reason is, everyone deserves to charge what their work is worth. And I think that generally people are understanding of that. You might have changes in like who the specific clientele is because of that, but generally there are clienteles at every price point within reason.
Yeah,
So
no, exactly. I like my Patreon. I like where I'm at with it because I feel it's like more accessible for the amount of work that I put into. It's more accessible. And again, people can disagree, and that's okay. Like people might want lower prices, but at the same point, like the content that I make available, I would rather have more people in my patronage than have less people that are paying me more. I would rather more people see the content, so I would rather have the price point of entry be a little bit lower, so I can build that community. And I finally got my Discord going like a month ago.
nice.
Yeah, I took forever to get that set up.
I feel that.
And I started doing writing streams too, and they mostly end up for me writing 20 minutes and then drinking and then drunkenly chatting with the few like 4 or 5 people that are in my in my chat. But I mean, I'm still building community. It's still technically work. Yeah,
No, I support that.
yeah. But anyway, I went on a tangent about pricing. But yeah, no, it's even if you're like lowballing yourself, and which you shouldn't do. But yeah, like just building your portfolio, like putting out as much content as you're able to. And I was lucky. Like again, I'm so thankful for the support, but I was also on disability for a while for my anxiety depression, and I had that fallback.
Yes.
Yeah, so if I didn't do well in writing a particular month, I was still getting income. And now I'm at the point where I don't need disability money because I make more than what disability is eligible to give me, which was a goal of mine, and I'm so thankful to have reached that goal. But yeah, I guess, again, a tangent. But just being able to put out as much as you're comfortable with, writing what you know you feel is missing, somebody will find you. Somebody will want to give you money. Keep working at it. Patience, diligence. Yeah, that's what I have. That's the advice I have to give.
Awesome. No, I think it's really beneficial and helpful. So I appreciate that. So then my last kind of question, and this kind of relates to what we were just talking about before we go to audience questions. We've talked a little bit about new writers trying to find like, the content that they feel isn't being met. Are there any scenarios in particular that you love but feel like don't get enough attention within the written sphere?
I would say the straight to gay doesn't get as much. It's gotten more attention now. Like, there are a ton of amazing werewolf TF writers out there, like male writers out there now. But they might have been there when I was first getting into it, but I couldn't find them. But like now there's tons of really good ones out there. But again, it's more people don't have the time to put, because people are doing it. If people are doing it as a hobby, they might not have enough time to output that material. So I think there's a ton of amazing writers out there who are certainly worthy of recognition, who aren't able to put that content out as much as their fan base might like, or as much as they might like. Because I know, like, you've talked to other like photo manipulators, for example, like Travis and Toledo. Thank you. I just listened to that episode, but like they're not able to, given life stuff, and which again is a shame, but also life happens.
Yeah, of course.
But again, I'm digressing a little bit. So it's really hard to say what scenarios I wish to see more of, because there are people out there who write those scenarios. They aren't able to do more. The creativity is there. The want is there. The desire is there. The time and energy is not.
No, I feel that. And I think that's a very even-keeled and respectful answer. So I appreciate that. So then, we have a few audience questions, and the first one I'm really glad was asked for this episode because I feel like I have the best person to maybe answer it. So we have a question from Charles Seidel, and he says, do you have any writing advice for post-TF scenarios?
Absolutely. Research, first of all. So it depends on the scenario, obviously, because if you're doing a TF into, like, again, I apologize. I know you're a huge fan of inanimate, like pool toy, that sort of thing.
I have been jokingly called Pool Toy Jesus, so yes.
That is not something I've thought about it, but I haven't actually written any of it.
Uh-huh.
So I'm very much looking at this question as a sphere of like anthro and animal TF.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe your answer will involve like inanimate and
It will.
And pool. Okay, that's good. It's not that I dislike the topic.
No, I get that.
Yeah, it's like if I were to do it, I would look at it from like a body horror aspect.
Of course.
Yeah, although you're in season 1, there was a lot of interest of like, oh, I'm going to be a fursuit. This is my purpose. I have a sense of purpose. And like that sort of logic of appeal made sense. But anyway, I will actually answer the question now. So looking at the lens from like an anthro TF, you have a lot of leeway into how that life will lead, like how much of your body is actually animal physiology and how much is still human. Like you have, because, well, I mean, TF is obviously a fictional thing, unfortunately. Sad face.
Sad face.
But you have more leeway in terms of like how much of the animal that you're turning into applies to your situation. But it's certainly food for thought. Like it's like, for example, if I'm going to turn into an anthro horse, how much of my diet needs to be vegetarian? How much am I still able to eat meat?
Right.
How much has my internal anatomy really changed? And you have that leeway to think about those things. Like, how many times do I need to eat a day? How is my energy? Like, how much stronger am I than my human self? And again, it depends, too, on your scenario. Are anthropomorphic animals prominent in society? If I'm turning into an anthropomorphic animal, how many other people are anthros? And I tackled this with a series that I did, this like animal protein shakes, and unfortunately I relegated those to Patreon because they weren't. I try to balance my Patreon between stories that I've written for myself and stories that I've written for others. Like anything anybody has given me consent to is available to the public. But anything that is like my own idea, I might have put it on the Patreon, which I think is, and with the amount of content that I've done, I think that's
very fair.
Yeah. But like anyway, the protein shake story was one that I had removed, and some people might be familiar with it. And I'll put back probably the preview at some point. I just need to get it edited and redone. It's on the list. There's a list. Did I mention the 40 tabs that I have open at all times? I did mention that.
You didn't, but also I'm the same way. I have like 40 tabs and I have like 3 windows, and I'm just like, help me, but also I refuse to close them because I might need them. So,
That's how I roll. That's how I roll with writing. I have everything open at all times. But yeah, like thinking it with Anthro TFs, it really depends on your world building. And thinking about your world building, I think, is the first step to that. To thinking about post TF. It's a little bit different if you're an animal, I think. Knowing that animals' habits, knowing what they eat, how they interact with other members of their species, anatomy and physiology, and comparing that to the same functions in humans. Like, I'll lead to. I'm sorry, I don't remember the guest that you had, the veterinarian expert.
oh, Curious Fox or Cameron.
Yes, they had some wonderful points. But like for example, like horses have a big cecum, so they're a bit more gassy. Thinking about like anatomical stuff like that, like how would that be compared to your human existence? Yeah, I use that one too much. I just that stuck out in my mind for some reason.
It's very striking, I think. So,
It certainly was because it's like you're thinking about the impossibility of actual TF, but you know we won't talk about that. We'll pretend it's possible, but yeah, like looking at the various aspects of the animal and comparing them to those similar functions and similar things within your own life is kind of how I approach it. And like, how would I feel if I were a horse, if I had to eat all day, if I didn't have hands and just felt the ground under my hooves vaguely? Because I don't have hands. That's one way that I interact with the world that I wouldn't have as a horse. Yeah. So I try to compare and contrast and do my research on the end.
I will chime in on the inanimate and kind of gender change lens. And again, I'm not a writer, well, not anymore. So take all my advice with a grain of salt because I don't do this for a living or anything. But when it comes to inanimate, I generally find that there is actually quite a bit that can be mined from the post TF scenarios. In particular, one of the things that I find that can be really explored within inanimate TF is the gradual mental shift between, being a total 100% human to having the mindset of an object to some degree. And again, this is all like, my kind of personal preference, but I find that when you're thinking about writing those kinds of post TF scenarios, a big focus has to be on how that object interacts with the rest of the world on a day-to-day basis. So to use an example, like if you were writing a mannequin TF, you'd want to be thinking about, okay, the cycle of the day would be like, they get an outfit put on them, they're displayed in a certain area, they might get taken to the back to get like, taken apart and like cleaned and stuff. And like you have to think about all of those things. And then, if you're trying to be spicy, like how would that play into like a sense of like feeling like you're fulfilling a purpose, or like what is the purpose of the object you're writing about, and therefore when it's doing that purpose, how does that make the person who is in the process of doing that purpose now make them feel? Oftentimes, to make it appealing, they might like it. There might be a different angle where you're horrified. How much of you is still left when you're in this kind of objective form? All of those things I think can be explored in a really unique way in post TF. And so I would think about those things before I start writing the actual scenario. From the gender lens, I do want to mention one thing. I generally find that gender TF is often in these cases combined with something else. So often it's combined with an animal. And I would just encourage that people not always boil it down to a bioessentialist lens, because there's a place for that and it can be quite hot. I've enjoyed it myself too. But I would also encourage people to think about it from a social contract perspective, because if, for example, you're becoming an anthro, like, how is that person now going to interact with society now that they're in a different gender? Like, yes, describe the parts changing and all of that good stuff, but more importantly, how do they go about their lives? Like, how do they navigate the relationships they once had or the new ones that they are building? I think those are things that are really important to think about, and not just simply boil it down to like, parts are changing from one thing to the other when you're thinking about post TF. So that would just be my 2 cents. And again, I'm not a writer, so take it or leave it.
I got called out on that very thing. It was a recent and I guess shout out if the person is listening. But I got called out on. I did a Bernese Mountain Dog TF recently, where it was an MTF, and the person who was commissioning wanted the character to be in heat, and the people's friends turned themselves into male Bernese, and orgies ensue. But I got called out for the trope. The person who called me out was like, they really didn't like that particular trope, and I mean, I guess part of me is like, well, if you don't like the trope, don't read it, but also, you made a really good point there where thinking about, and something I haven't really explored with my writing, because I tend not to do gender TF in terms of like anthro, or in terms of like just straight up gender TF. It would be something to think about. Absolutely. And it's certainly something to explore. And like, I've talked to enough opposite gender or in between gender people to know that like I could use them as resources to make sure that what I was writing was a good example of their own experiences. But yeah, that is just something I have not really explored yet, which is something that could be definitely explored. And yeah, you just make a good point. There are so many social aspects to consider in terms of, you know, how do my relationships change? How do other people view me? There's, for example, like with MTF, there's a lot of sexism.
Yes, there is.
With a sort of like a mid-gender or non-binary change, there's a lot of societal feedback, unfortunately, with that. So, like, those are things that could definitely be considered as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll drop one hot take before we move to the next question. And anyone is free to debate me on this, but inanimate TF is whatever gender you are before to not having a gender. And that's my hot take. So all inanimate TF is in some way a non-binary TF. Anyways, I will not be explaining myself further. You can debate me.
I don't think that's a hot take at all. I think that's just like, I think that's very accurate. I mean, but somebody else might find it a hot take for sure. Yeah, but yeah, no, that's definitely a facet to look at it through. Like that's a really good point.
Thank you. Yeah, that's how I think of it.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Excellent. So we have another question from Figerfire, and Figerfire asks, "What little things do you do that are inspired by your love of TF?" So, for example, some have talked about their jobs being inspired by it, or their mannerisms, or just choices in attire. I'll answer this first. I wear tails all the time, like in public and around wherever. I'm going to the store. I'm wearing a tail. I don't give a shit what anyone says. I think that's inspired by my love of TF, and my life is better off for it. But beyond that, also, I would just say that, you know, like even subtle decor chain selections in my place are like nods to TF. Like I have TF art that I've framed and will like have out because again, it's the little things that spice things up in life. Whether it's my my phone background or my desktop background or what have you, you know, there are ways in which you can integrate it into your life on a daily basis. Some bigger, like wearing a tail, or some smaller ones, like the other examples. And yeah, I try to keep it involved to some degree because it's an important part of who I am, and I think it's totally fine to explore in that way. So that's me at least.
Absolutely. I actually don't do any of those things, but I also write TF for a living, so it's like I get my TF fill from writing and not having, for the most part, I don't have to hide what I do from people. With family, I just say I write erotica, because the family that I have don't really understand furry, and if they don't understand furry, they're not going to understand TF. But like my sort of inner circle knows what I do. I guess I get a lot of my TF from writing every day. Like I do see the appeal of wearing a tail. I do have a lot of like furry related clothing, like shirts. Like I play a lot of TCGs. I tend to play a lot of like either furry or furry adjacent decks. Like so, I play my decks based on aesthetics more so than I do competitiveness. Although I am very competitive with my TCGs, I do try to take the decks that I like and make them the best they can be and play them the best I can. And that is my enjoyment when it comes to card games, as opposed to like taking the best quote unquote meta deck. And these might be terms for people who aren't familiar with TCGs. Although the context applies to like various like video games and other sort of competitive like board games and like other sort of competitive gaming. Um, but yeah, I try to appeal to that aesthetic when I can, and I guess that's really it. Like, I'll wear my tail at fur cons. I love wearing a tail, but I don't generally do that on a regular basis. But I'm also in a smaller city, and people point and laugh. Whereas, like, if you're in a bigger city, then people are just like, oh, that's not the weirdest thing I saw today. Is somebody going with a tail?
Yeah, I mean, look, I live in the biggest city in Canada, and there are far stranger things you will see downtown than me wearing a tail. So I think it's almost a source of reprieve and joy for some people to see. So like totally different context.
No, exactly. Absolutely. But I totally agree with you. Just as a final point to the question, finding something that makes you happy, and if you love TF and you find some aspect that you're able to express that love of TF, go for it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Life's too short.
Life is too short. Make life worth living for you.
Yeah, agreed. And then we have a last question from our illustrious Ulysses Duckler, and he writes, if humanity made contact with aliens tomorrow, would drawing or writing human to alien TF content become problematic or diplomatic? And would you be offended if the aliens never produced any alien to human TF content of their own?
I have a lot to say about this, surprisingly. We're making a lot of assumptions here. First of all, we're making the assumptions that the aliens coming aren't here to kill us or take all our resources, which is the more likely scenario if aliens are doing interstellar travel.
They're not here to bang us? What are you talking about?
Wish. Um, assuming... Okay, so we're making a lot of assumptions here in order to possibly answer the question. We're making the assumption that the aliens are enough like us that they have the same sort of cultural values that we do, the same sort of innovations that we do, the same sort of morals.
They might not even know what drawing or writing is.
Exactly. Like, we have to assume they're human adjacent enough. And within that assumption, there's going to be quote-unquote deviants who would be like, into the possibility of TF, even if it's occurred to them. Like, it might not be something that has occurred to them, or depending, again, we're making a lot of assumptions here. If the aliens are like us, that they go through a life cycle where they age and change, like, the concept of TF might not exist to them. So, assuming it does, then much like our own society, we're going to see the same representation of creativity, whereas a few aliens would be like, hey, the idea of people turning into us is hot. Or vice versa, where they're like, hey, turning into a human is hot. Although I can't fathom why any species
Yeah, I
would want
don't
to turn
know.
into a human.
I would genuinely not be offended if they never produced it.
I know,
'cause
right?
I don't fully see the appeal, but
Yeah.
anyways.
But yeah, I guess it really, you're making a ton of assumptions to be able to answer the question, and you're essentially boiling it down to, are they human enough to have that desire? And you're probably going to see the same level of, and I'll call it deviancy because it's against a societal norm, but I will say that, yeah, I would assume you'd have the same level of deviancy and desire to escape one's physical form as you would within our own society.
I agree. I honestly don't have anything unique to add on to that answer. I completely agree, and I'm of the same mind. And yeah, I would not be offended if they didn't produce that kind of alien to human TF content if they were of a similar like level in terms of those societal norms. So
I would definitely want to, the same as like when a new Pokemon game comes out and everybody's TFing into the Pokemon. If we had an alien race, I would absolutely expect that TF fans would immediately do art like within an hour or two.
yes,
The same as like when we get a new
speedruns.
Pokemon release.
Yeah, the speedruns after the live streams are the
Yeah,
cracks.
yeah.
Oh my god.
They are a thing of beauty.
They are.
Those people are truly doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, bless those people. Oh my god. Amazing. Well, that was all the questions I had for you. I really appreciate you coming on. It's been really great chatting with you. And I was curious to know, like, where can people find you online if they want to read more of your amazing stories?
So I'm on FA at Gabriel Moon. My Patreon is patreon.com/Gabe Moon. My Twitter is at Gabe Moon. I have my own website, which is gabrielmoon.ca, which, again, is something that I was very fortunate to, and again, this comes from a past podcast or a past episode, but I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to get a website super cheap and have somebody help me design it. Although that person is a little bit sus and has fallen off the face of the earth, and I can say that because they've fallen off the face of the earth. I would not normally say that if they had not fallen off the face of the earth, but but hey, I have a monthly subscription fee and I pay it, and my website's up, so that's all that really matters. But I have a website, and it is gabrielmoon.ca. I'm sure you'll post the links in the show notes.
Yes, and shout out to that glorious .ca domain at the end. Got to give that Canadian rep.
Well,
So
exactly. But yeah, I think that's for the most part. I'm also on So Furry, but I don't post there as frequently. But yeah, I think for the most part, that's where you can find me.
well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciated chatting with you about all of this and kind of getting to pick your brain on some of these topics because I think that you explore them in a really cool way in your stories. And yeah, I think there's a lot that I think the audience will enjoy hearing about. So yeah, thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I was really, really honored when you asked me to come on, and I've had a great time chatting with you as well.
Amazing. I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this week's episode of the TF Tuesday podcast. Again, remember you can leave questions under the comments in the YouTube video or tweet at us with the hashtag TFTuesdayPod to tweet questions at us. We add questions at the end of every segment. And as always, if there was something that sparked a thought in your mind or you do want to debate me on my hot take, please leave a comment and let me know. I am always excited to hear about feedback. But in the meantime, I hope everyone is staying hydrated, staying safe, keeping an open mind, and staying TFE. So thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.